as well. I can't tell you guys how excited I am to be here with you all this morning. Not sure if you guys have experienced the same thing as I have this week, but how many of your kids are out of school for the summer? Yeah, come on now. It's not great. Our kids started their summer break on Friday at 11:30, and I know this because at 11:40 when they got in the car, I feel like they were switched. Their bodies are here, but they've got the spirit of the devil inside of them, more so than they usually have. We've been trying to get that out of them, but we just can't seem to shake it. I called Vanessa. She wanted to FaceTime them on the way home from school, and I FaceTimed her when I got home. And I told her that we were under attack. The house was under siege. And I was bunkered down in our storm shelter, waiting for the wild animals to get out so we could be safe. And she told me that I can't keep calling our bathroom the storm shelter. Told me I can't keep calling the kids wild animals, and reminded me that they will not go away. So somebody has to tame them. So I got a couple jerky sticks. Slid them under the door until I heard them ravage it enough to fall asleep. And then I snuck out to the neighbor's house and waited until Vanessa got home. She said, "How can I help you, baby? It sounds a little stressful." I said, "I need a lot of Jesus and at least one Red Bull. Make it a 20-ouncer. We'll call it good." But man, I'm telling you, if you've spent any time with my kids over the last couple of days, they're worse than they normally are. They're normally great kids. I don't know what happened to them. They've been spending too much time with their grandma lately. Loaded up on sugar. I know. Mama's got them this week. But in all seriousness, though, while I was hiding out from my children, our team was hard at work here. I want to share with you a couple exciting things that happened this week. First, on Friday night, our Cultivate Youth did a bowling event. And it was, come on. It was the biggest youth event that we've had this year. I think it was like 12 kids, something like it, maybe more than that. I don't know, 3 bowling lanes worth of however many that was. And so we got the kids out there, had some fun. Dwayne and Ashley and Gabe and Jaden braved that storm. I told them, I said, I'm not prepared to be around teenagers. And then they reminded me that I've got one at home. And I told them I'm still not ready. Can you take her? So she's free to a good home. If anybody, got a 3-year-old too, if anybody wants to go halvesies, just split time. I also want to give a shout out. Yesterday, we had our church yard sale. Yeah. I'm going to be honest with you guys up front. I hadn't been to a yard sale since I was young, and I've done one yard sale, and it was terrible. I think we lost money somehow on giving things away. I paid people to take things away. I was like, just get it out. And so I wasn't sure what to expect, but Ruth and Chris, they've been working their tails off. Janice and Dave, Anita, there's a lot of folks, Ashley, Jaden, and Trinity were manning the bake sale. And I don't know who it was that made the peanut butter icing. Sweet Jesus. I would eat it by the bowl. It was good. None of that has anything to do with the success. I think I ate most of the peanut butter. But we brought in about $2,000. Yeah. So that's all going directly toward our expansion project, which, can you believe it or not, we're just 3 Sundays left in this building after today before our summer vacation. We're calling it a summer vacation because people like taking vacations. So we're hopeful that if we call it one, people will be sure to show up every week. It's our summer vacation. Mark it on your calendars. Where are we going? We're going to Saluda Trail Middle School. I hear it's nice. I hear it's beachy. A lot of touristy types of things. We'll bring sand if it gets you there. But we'll be there for the 22nd of June all the way through the end of July. It's going to be good. But one thing I want to share as an encouragement and also a challenge or an invitation is that everything that I've just described and everything that you saw here this morning, minus me stumbling through my song to open service, is all volunteer based. I'm not sure how many people realize I'm the only pastor on this team that gets a salary. There's no other paid staff here. Everything that you see here on a Sunday morning is volunteer hours put in. It's sweat, it's tears, it's sometimes blood, only when we argue about song choices. But it really is. It's an incredible thing to be a part of. And I just want to challenge all of you. If you're not serving in any area, I'm going to challenge you. Give me 6 months serving 1 week per month in any area that you choose. And tell me after that 6 months if your life has not changed for the better. I promise you it will. You'll see these volunteer groups become family of sorts. You'll see that there's purpose on a Sunday morning when you realize that I have so little to do with what actually takes place on Sunday. Much of what's shaped and much of what is experienced is put together by the volunteers here that pour their hours and their dedication into what's happening. So I want to challenge you all, sign up to serve. Ashley's going to be at the Next Steps area, and don't say you don't know where it is. There's giant letters on the wall. I've heard somebody say, I don't know where Next Steps is. I'm like, just look up. There's giant letters on the wall. It's hard to miss. Go there, sign up, serve. I promise you, you will get excited and you will be involved in a way that you didn't imagine. But once you start, you can't imagine not doing it. Amen? Anybody attest to that? Volunteers? Come on, that's good. It's good. We're going to need volunteers for this vacation. Somebody's going to have to bring the sand and fill up the kiddie pool. That way we can have the umbrella time on Sunday mornings at our beach stay. But if I can be real with you guys, because you know I like to keep it transparent, I'm going to be real. There's only a couple folks in this building that know what I'm about to say. When we first started talking about this summer move, I know I've painted it to be something very exciting. I was incredibly nervous and still am incredibly nervous to step out of this building and go mobile again. There's a long story to it, but if you've been with Cultivate for a while, you'll know the last time we changed buildings, about 80% of the church didn't come with us. So I'm hopeful that don't happen again. But if I can be very real, I'm going to be honest. I shared last week how much I love disruptions when it comes to road trips. Because I absolutely am distracted by anything flashy, anything delicious, and anything peanut butter or banana related. But I am absolutely not excited about disruptions to the usual. I'm a very structured and organized guy, and so this move has made me a little bit uncomfortable. But that's why I think we're in this series right now. Somebody asked me, how do you pick timing when you preach what you preach? And I'll be really honest with you. This is not a series that I had on our calendar until we signed on the dotted line and said, man, you know what? We really are moving. We really are disrupting business as usual. And I just felt like God might be speaking to me through my own insecurities, a word that could bless you all wherever you are. Come on. And it's not an easy realization to open your eyes and realize that God's putting you in an uncomfortable position on purpose. But once you realize that he's placed you there, you have to ask why, and you have to ask, what can I learn from this? And I realized that moving a Sunday morning location for you guys a couple hours every Sunday morning probably isn't the biggest deal in the world. But for me, it's a disruption. And I realized that it's a small disruption likely in comparison to some of the disruptions that many of us might be walking through in our own lives right now. Maybe for somebody here, work has been going incredibly well. You're hitting every single mark that you've got. You're crushing your goals and you're moving up and you're growing in your confidence. And then, boom, out of nowhere, you get a disruption of your boss popping into your office saying, hey, you've been reassigned to a different department or project. Or you've been downsized. Come on. That's a disruption I don't think anybody wants. I think this is one that's definitely hit home for us lately. You've been on a financial journey lately, right? Putting away every penny that you could possibly put away, saving everything you could save, and paying down your debt so that you can take that next step towards your financial goals. And then out of nowhere, an unexpected expense hits. Maybe your air conditioning goes out at home and you got to drop a big check to get the AC working during this Carolina summer. Maybe something happens medically and you've got to drain your account, and everything that you've spent the last 6 months working toward is gone in an instant, and you realize that this disruption takes you right back to where you started. Come on, anybody experiencing some of this? This one might be a little difficult here, but maybe there's somebody here that's been praying for their marriage and waiting for God to step in and waiting for God to move. And you've been through the counseling. You've been through the prayer. You've been through the conversation, and you've been consistent with your gains, and you feel like you're making great progress and moving in the right direction. And then out of nowhere, your spouse tells you that they're just not there yet. They tell you that, I know we've worked on this, but I just don't think it's working. I think we need to reassess what's going on in our lives. And these are some of the conversations that I'm continuing to hear as God is throwing us into a place where we're disrupted and we're given the opportunity to respond in faith or to react in the flesh. And choosing one of those is the most difficult thing for us to do, because so often what's right doesn't feel like it in the moment, and what's wrong feels so much easier. Has anybody been there? There's a number of things that we could be staring at right now or chasing us down in the moment. And if I can be real, not every disruption's a bad disruption. Maybe you've been hitting a really good place in life and you find out you're blessed with another baby. That would be great. Vanessa would be jumping for joy, although it's physically impossible. So if you see that happening, you just know that there is a miracle taking place. The kids have been asking all the time, like, Dad, Mom, you've been really looking at baby stuff a lot lately. We having another one? She goes, I'm just dreaming. And I said, well, keep it to yourself, Mary. It's already happened once. It's not coming again. Not coming again. Maybe your disruption is another grandbaby. I know there's several in here celebrating the news of grandbabies on the way, and I'm excited for all of that for you guys. I know that disruptions can look different for all of us. Maybe it's a great disruption. Maybe you got a job offer that you weren't expecting, and it's a better offer than the job you had, and now you're transitioning into a place of uncertainty. And although it's good uncertainty, uncertainty is uncertain, right? I know that there's a different thing for all of us right now, but I believe the reason that we're in this series is so that we can take a look at not only how Jesus responds to disruptions, not only to how he responds to these encounters that he faces along the road to his journey, but I believe we're also in this series so we can see how those around him are affected, how those around him are transformed. And I'm not just talking about the ones who have received the miracles. I'm talking about the ones who have witnessed them, right? One of my favorite pieces of scripture is as Jesus is walking toward his friend Lazarus, who's died in the tomb. He says, Lazarus, come out of the grave. And he goes, this isn't for me because I know you'll move. This is for everybody here to witness what you're capable of. So I want us to look in this series at what does it look like when we see how others respond to uncertain and unexpected changes in our lives. And last week we kicked this series off by looking at Luke chapter 7. If you missed it, we looked at Luke 7 as Jesus healed a servant of a centurion soldier. And that was quite possibly, if we're not familiar, that centurion very well could have been one of the soldiers that took part in the arrest and the crucifixion of Jesus sometime thereafter. The centurion was the ultimate sign of oppression for the Jews, but he humbled himself to come to a position of need where he said, Jesus, I'm not even worthy for you to come under my roof, and I'm certainly not worthy to stand before you. But if you're willing, where you are, say in the moment, and my faith tells me that my servant will be healed. And what did Jesus do? He said, go, he will be well. And that servant was healed. Now today, we're going to be taking a look at a polar opposite in terms of social standing as we look at a story from Matthew chapter 15 with another disruption that leads to an eternal transformation. So where we find ourselves here in the story is smack dab in the middle of two pretty big events in their own right. Jesus is coming off of a scathing rebuke of the Pharisees. This is like an ultimate mic drop moment. Classic Jesus. If there was a table, he probably would have flipped it. He was ready to go. He was on another level. And it's right before he does another healing. He's walking through here, and the chapter starts like this, and it's important for us to gain context. Matthew chapter 15, starting in verse 1. It says, then the Pharisees and the scribes came to Jerusalem to Jesus, and they asked, why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? For they don't wash their hands when they eat. And in typical Jesus fashion, he turns that question into a teaching moment, and he gives them another question that comes along with the lesson that I'm sure everyone except for the Pharisees and the scribes were very grateful to be able to watch. Verse 3, he responds with a question, and he says, why do you break God's command because of your tradition? Boom, right? Like, I don't know about you, but if that question hits me in response to my question, like, I'm dipping out. Like, I'm done. Like, you know what, Jesus? You're right. That's my bad. You keep eating with your dirty hands. Like, that's on you. I'm good with it. You ain't got to come at me like that. I'm just going to head back on my way. We don't got to take this any further. But these Pharisees were either stubborn or incredibly stupid. They didn't know when to call it quits. They just keep pushing these buttons, right? So Jesus doubles down, and in verse 8, he says to them, these people honor me with their lips, talking about the Pharisees. He says, but their hearts are far from me. He says, they worship me in vain, teaching as doctrines the commands of men. He teaches on the concept of outer beauty, right? He talks about vanity. And the reason that this tradition is played out in a sense is because there's nothing scriptural about it. It's also that those around them can look at them and tell them how great of a job they're doing. He continues here and he tells them it's not what goes into the mouth that defiles a man, but what comes out of the mouth that defiles a man. He says, don't you realize that whatever goes into this mouth passes out of the stomach and it's eliminated? And he says again, but what comes out of the mouth comes from the heart. And that defiles a man. What comes out of the mouth comes from the heart. And so what happens after this, again, in typical disciple fashion, Peter gets confused. The Pharisees get offended. And Jesus tells the same thing as plainly as he possibly can so that there are no questions remaining about where he stands on the situation. Then he drops the mic, tosses the table, and he walks. I'm just kidding, there wasn't no table. But it feels like he would have tossed. I would have tossed one if I were in his shoes. He walks on over to provide healing and teaching on the other side of Galilee. But before he arrives there, he's disrupted in a way that forces the disciples and those traveling with him to put into action the very words that they just heard. Matthew 15:21 is where today's story picks up here. It says, when Jesus left there, he withdrew to the area of Tyre and Sidon. Just then, a Canaanite woman from that region came and kept crying out, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is cruelly tormented by a demon." Remember last week the shock that we talked about, how they must have experienced an incredible amount of surprise as the centurion, one of Jesus's greatest enemies, called out in faith. And now take that shock and multiply that by about 1,000, and then add to that mix a fair amount of anger, frustration, and a healthy dose of disgust. And that probably pales into comparison the level of frustration that these Jewish travelers carried with them as they watched this interaction of this Canaanite woman coming to Jesus and begging for healing. See, one of the things that I think we're really fortunate to have here in our time is we're able to see the cross, and we're able to recognize verses like Romans 5:8, that Jesus died while we were still sinners, right? John 3:16, that he so loved the world that he sent him for everyone, right? We recognize that Jesus paid the price for all of our sin. But those walking with Jesus were still trying to figure out what type of a Jewish rabbi he was. And for starters, the reason this was so offensive to them for this woman to come crying out to him is because a woman speaking publicly to a man without first being spoken to was taboo. It didn't happen. Unless I address you, you're not talking to me. Especially if I'm a rabbi, if I'm a teacher, you're definitely not coming to me publicly without me giving you permission and taking you into a private place, because women in this culture were not seen in the same light that we see them today. So that was shocking enough, but what took it to another level was the fact that she was a Canaanite woman. Or, as some might call it, a Syrophoenician woman. In this region here, the Syrophoenician region is what would be modern day Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon, right? It's an area that is still a great deal of conflict. But why was this offensive, right? It's important for us to understand who this woman was. You see, as a Canaanite, she represented literally everything that the Jews despised. She and her people occupied a land that God had promised to Abraham way back early Genesis, right? And when Israel conquered Canaan, which was the promised land, remember, God told them to eliminate the enemy, take the land that I've given you, and leave no remnants of the wickedness that was there before. But does anybody remember that story? They didn't. They left remnants. They left idols. They allowed some of the people to continue living with them. And before long, their Jewish faith became intermingled in a sense that caused all of them to reach a place of perverted gospel that eventually morphed into a false god and a state of idolatry. See, these Canaanites here, they were everything the opposite of what God wanted to establish in his place. They were idol worshipers. And I'm not just talking like they were big fans of some statue, right? They had these false gods that they would provide human sacrifices for. Quite often, they would provide child sacrifices to appease these gods in hopes that they would shine down on them and give them some source of hope or life. This Canaanite woman, and everyone that she came with and everything that she represented, was viewed as the personification of sin and wickedness. I mean, it was evil in the flesh, and they were viewed as direct enemies of the living God. The embodiment of lostness and alienation due to the lengths that they would go to appease these false idols. So now that we're painting a picture, we can only imagine, think of the worst possible type of person that you could imagine walking through these doors and begging you for help. And I promise you, the first reaction you have, regardless of whether you want it to be or not, is you're going to pull back. Whoa, you're in the wrong place. It's a little too late to be coming up with that. I hated on a certain NFC East team last week. I'm not even going to do that. They're way worse than those guys. Way worse than them. She was the ultimate outsider here. And so as we think of this disruption with that perspective in mind, we see that everything that could possibly be working against this woman in her life was working against her. Where she came from, what she believed, what she practiced, her culture, her ethnicity, her nationality, and even her gender served little purpose other than widening the gap between where she needed to be and where she was. And the worst part of this story is that for you and I, when we find ourselves separated from God's presence, we know that there's a bridge to get from here to there. But for these people, they were shunned and they were placed off into a distance as far away from everyone as they could. And they were told that there was no hope that they could ever receive forgiveness or healing or peace. So they settled into the reality that they called their own of believing that they were damned to hell for all eternity. And they started to live in that wickedness so that they didn't remember that there was hope for something better on the other side. This woman approaches Jesus as the ultimate outsider, as the epitome of hopelessness, and for all intents and purposes, she's a lifeless spiritual zombie who is dead in sin and hated by everyone who looks at her. Even the smallest bit of hope in the very one that she loved, this daughter was probably the only person that she even considered someone that she could love. All she knew and all she wanted and all she hoped for was lying in her hands, being tormented by a demon day and night. And there's no description of what this looks like. But I can only imagine seeing one of my little ones, as crazy as they can be. I can only imagine looking at them helplessly in my arms, wondering who could save them and knowing that the only person who could probably wouldn't even want to look at me. All she knew was that her daughter was in need. And all she knew that the only person who could heal her was the very one that she'd been pushing away. You see, for this setting here, culture and society had declared that she and her daughter were living in the rightful consequences of their sin. They were, as you would say, paying the price for the sins of their father. They deserved what was going on in their lives as how society looked at what was happening, and what they were experiencing as torment and possession was in fact nothing more than looking at a life that was completely void of the presence of the Almighty God. She cries out for help in verse 23, and it says that Jesus did not even say a word to her. If we're looking contextually at this, the way it's written in its original text, it would actually indicate that Jesus turned his face from her and he looked away. And right here, it's important that we recognize Jesus' actions of turning his face and ignoring her actually carried a great deal of significance. You see, from the disciples' perspective, they see Jesus turn his face and ignore the woman, and they believe that he is seemingly agreeing with the position of the crowd. Jesus turns his face, and it says he ignores the woman here, and they believe that he is giving in to the consensus of the masses. And if you could imagine, I bet Peter was standing there feeling validated with the rest of the disciples saying, all right, boys, he's finally catching on to how we do things around here. This Jesus guy's going to learn. We've been trying to teach him. I think we finally got it, all right? It's just a matter of time. Jesus, don't worry about this. I got you. Go take a seat. I'll send her on her way. In verse 23, it continues. As it says, his disciples approached him and urged him, "Send her away because she cries after us." Now picture one of these disciples getting ready to do so, and I picture Jesus stepping up and saying, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. Don't worry, guys. I got it. I'll take care of this. I'll show you how you respond to someone like this." He says, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." He says, "It isn't right to take the children's bread and throw it to their dogs." And this scripture itself is a source of a lot of conflict for people who don't know how to read in context. See, he's not calling this woman a dog. That's what the Canaanites were referred to by the religious elite. They view them as little more than wild animals because of the lawlessness in which they live. So as the disciples and as the Pharisees and as the scribes are listening to this story, you got to imagine, if I'm Jesus's PR guy, like, this is the ultimate PR move, right? It's like, you know what, Jesus? You lost the Pharisees a couple verses ago when you called them all dirty, filthy sinners, but you're bringing them back. You called the woman a dog. Like, we're in good shape. Keep it up. We might make some steady progress here. They're going to eat it up. Now send her away and we'll really be in good shape. But what happens next is yet another plot twist to an ever-evolving solution as Jesus attempts to bring the crowd to a place of recognition and speaking the truth that they've already heard just a couple of days ago, right? See, this is why context in Scripture is so important. I love a good story, and I love the completion of a good story. And as you take a look at the Gospels, they paint one full picture. And Jesus is so good at teaching in a way of reminding you of one truth while sharing another, right? Remember, he did this on the cross as he said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Remember, there were people at the foot of the cross that said, look, even his God's ignoring him. But those who knew the context of the story knew exactly what he was doing. He was quoting Psalm 22, which was a foretelling of his crucifixion, right? With one word, if you don't understand what's happening, you assume Jesus has given up. But with an understanding of context, you recognize that he's telling you he's fulfilling the very thing that you tried to keep him from. And so Jesus does something very similar here in this technique here. If you take a look at verse 23 again, the disciples, they say, "Send her away because she cries after us." And if you're following in context and you read the last couple of chapters, you'll realize that there's actually a pattern that's taking place here. And Jesus is using their own words to teach them a lesson that they've already learned. Flip it back to Matthew chapter 14, and we see these disciples use the same words when they're faced with another problem. Right? Jesus, they get in the water and they come up, and as they come up to the shore, there's a crowd that's waiting for them anxiously to hear what Jesus has to say to them. And as the crowd gathers, he recognizes they need food. And in verse 15, it says, when evening came, the disciples approached Jesus, and they said, "This place is a wilderness, and it's already late." Catch this. What do they say here? "Send the crowds away so they can go to the village and buy food for themselves." Jesus tells them the answer to the question that they're facing in Matthew chapter 15. In Matthew chapter 14, he says, they don't need to go away. Give them something to eat. He says, you give them something. They're not responsible for meeting a need that they can't meet. It's on me, right? The disciples, they're viewing this woman as yet another disruption that they have no solution for. They're viewing this woman as yet another a problem or yet another burden, yet Jesus sees their response as yet another tradition and yet another pattern of their culture clouding their vision of the kingdom. And it's really important for us to catch this. In Matthew 14, they ask, how should we feed them? Right? They tossed around a couple of ideas, and every idea that they could possibly think of came out, I'm sure. Maybe we could do this. Maybe we could do that. Maybe we could have someone fishing and just toss them up as they catch them, and we could just do it feed as you go type of situation. And they came up with every solution that they possibly could, while never realizing that the very one who posed the question was the actual solution to their shortage. See, while they hadn't found a way, their reaction was to send them away. When in reality, Jesus wanted their reaction to be recognizing that he is the way. See, we turn the page just one page over, and we see that even after seeing Jesus do the impossible and tell them, hey, there's no way that we can feed them, Jesus says, give me those fish, give me that bread, and we can make this work. There's no need to worry. It's on me. But what do they know? They lean on their flesh. They lean on their understanding. And the first thing that they say is send her away. And I've got to tell you, if I was Jesus, and that's a bold claim, but if I was in a position like Jesus, I would get very frustrated with these disciples because it seems like they never understand the point of the story. It feels a lot like parenthood, I'm telling you. I'm telling you, Jeremiah's been asking me how to whistle for the last 5 days, and he won't go to bed until he gets a tone. So I told him to just keep practicing, so he just laying in bed. I said, buddy, it takes time, it takes practice, and it takes patience, almost like you could apply that to any situation in the world. So Jesus leads them to a teaching moment in this story here. A moment that was so recent that I would be willing to bet at least one of the disciples was still carrying one of the leftover loaves in his backpack from the feeding. I guarantee it. It's a page over. I don't know how long that is in time, but they ate bread for a long time back then. Somebody's got a piece of that bread tucked away in their pocket. And I'd be willing to bet it was Matthew. He seems a little cheap. All right. Maybe Judas. Maybe he was going to use it as a weapon. I don't know what's going on with it. But I guarantee someone still has a piece of that bread left over as a reminder. And he literally gives them a clue in the telling of the story in verse 26. What does he say? It isn't right to give a child's bread to the dogs. If I'm sitting there, I'm like, hold on, bread? We just did the bread thing. Yeah. Guys, Jesus has the answer, right? They didn't pick up on it. So I thank God for this woman who everyone else would say had no faith, but Jesus says has faith like he's never seen. In verse 27, it says she responds to Jesus after he says, why should I give you the food from the children's mouth? She responds and she says, yes, Lord. But even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. So Jesus replies to her, woman, your faith is great. Let it be done for you as you want. And it says from that moment, her faith, her daughter was cured. She said, even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. I don't know about you guys, but the imagery of the crumbs falling from the master's table and me reaching for it in desperation because I just need some source of sustenance. And the imagery of her persistence are a very harsh reminder to me of a desperation that I'm not sure I've had in quite some time. I don't know about you guys. Maybe you've got more faith than Pastor today, but I don't remember the last time I was scrounging for crumbs at the foot of the master's table, just wanting any little piece that I can get for what he has. You see, despite telling the crowds to leave them alone, despite society telling her that she doesn't belong anywhere near the presence of Jesus, and despite the fact that everything about her surroundings and her upbringing stood for everything that Jesus opposed, This woman shows us the one point of today's message, and that is unshakable faith leads to unmatched mercy. Unshakable faith leads to unmatched mercy. I want you to make no mistake about it this morning. This woman was a sinner. Probably if we were going to rank sinners, she would have been one of the worst, just where she came from. I know we like to compare that in church. She'd have been top 5. I gotta tell you, we're all top 5, but if we're in church folk time, like we're measuring because that's what we like to do. She was a sinner, no mistake. She was an idol-worshiping Gentile who very likely spent most of her life mocking everything that religion represented. Mocking the tradition, mocking the customs, and probably mocking the pretentiously judgmental looks and words that she caught from the very people who were claiming to represent a God whose very essence is love. She was lost, she was hopeless, and she was sinful until she met Jesus. I want you guys to catch this because I don't know about you, but I've not been holy my whole life. I know I look like I came in here floating on a cloud straight from heaven itself. It's a thunderstorm. It's not a good cloud. Rough landing, that's right. Something happened in the facial region. I just don't know what's going on with it. Sorry, I'm not better looking. I know she heard the whispers as she's walking toward Jesus, right? And not just from the Jews. I guarantee people from her own village were like, don't even go there. They don't want to see you. She says, but I've got to speak to that man. He can help my daughter. And I guarantee her friends are like, your daughter's lost. She's helpless. There's no reason for you to even bother approaching. But I'm sure she also heard the stories of the many that came to see him and the many who left changed, healed, freed, and restored. The others that she saw healed from demonic possession, delivered, set free, and turned into witnesses and evangelists for the kingdom. The stories of dead things coming to life at the very mention of his name. I guarantee she heard that many call him rabbi. Many called him a prophet. But I promise you that as she looks at Jesus with that sense of desperation, she recognizes that this is no ordinary teacher. This is no ordinary man, and this is certainly no prophet. Because there were many who claim to be prophets who are speaking absolute nonsense in this time. She looks at Jesus and she recognizes that his word holds power. His presence renders peace, and his touch brings about a healing that only he can provide. And despite everything within her and everything around her telling her to keep her mouth closed and accept the consequences of her own actions, the Spirit begins to stir something in her soul and shows her that though her sin is great, his grace is greater. That though her heart is broken, he can piece it back together. And that though the distance is wide between where she needs to be and where she is, there is only one source who can bridge these gaps together, and his name is Jesus. See, the disciples would still need some more lessons on where to turn to after this lesson. And I've got to be honest with you, I thank God that the disciples are as thick-skulled as I am sometimes. Because I'm able to see lessons from these fools every time I open the Bible and realize that I'm not the only one that doesn't get it every time. We might never get to see these beautiful reminders that we do throughout Scripture if the disciples were as smart as some of you guys. But thankfully, your pastor and these disciples are a little bit dumb sometimes. We're not just called to love those who look, talk, and act like us. And this is a very important thing to take away. We're not just called to serve the ones we enjoy spending time with, especially when that spending time is doing the things that we enjoy doing. We're called to model what Jesus embodies in stories like this, and that is spending time with those we don't enjoy spending time with, loving those who we don't think deserve our love, and extending grace to the very ones who have crushed, broken, and ripped out our hearts. I want us to recognize this morning that whatever brokenness stands before us, I want to encourage us during this next song to cry out in the spirit of desperation with the same belief as this woman, recognizing that only an unshakable faith will lead to an unmatched mercy. Won't you pray with me?